Useless people like you are better off in a rural branch. Nick, the store manager, sneered at me as he said this. After a moment of thought, I decided to leave a little snide remark. You'll regret this, you know? What? Even though I didn't report it to the higher upus, I couldn't leave without a bit of payback. After this exchange, I moved to an island and started working furiously. Because of Nick, I couldn't do my job properly before, but here I can. I'm gonna work hard and prove him wrong. Thanks to my efforts, the branch I worked at soon exceeded $600 million. We became #1 in sales. A year after my demotion, thanks to my continuous hard work, I became the top salesperson and was asked to give a seminar to the head office staff. That's where Nick would meet his downfall. My name is Jacob. I'm a diligent 30-something employee who works hard every day. My hobby is food touring, and on weekends, I visit various restaurants on Gourmet Street. I work for a company that sells seafood products. We process and sell crabs, oysters, abalone, and more. Within the company, I'm just an employee working at the urban headquarters, but my customer reviews are excellent. I'm confident in my customer service. Customers who visit the store say things like this. Jacob is very attentive. It's really helpful. His explanations are easy to understand too. He speaks slowly and doesn't rush, even for someone like me who's hard of hearing. It's really appreciated. However, I make sure not to get overconfident. An older, reliable senior who was with me a few years ago taught me a lot, which is why I can make customers happy. Therefore, I remind myself that I'm not working on my own strength alone and strive to keep my motivation high. That's why I actively participate in corporate study sessions and read books on customer service tips. But recently, I haven't been able to improve myself as much as I'd like. The reason is Nick, the manager at the same store. Other employees are working hard and getting results. You're completely useless. What a waste of space you are. He always says this while dumping a ton of menial tasks on me at the worst possible times. Because he keeps giving me these tasks, I can't focus on my actual job. Nick, the 50-something manager, is quite competent, so he might be considered a good person if he worked seriously. As long as nothing piqued his interest, he would just do his job normally. However, he seems unable to go a day without harassing me at least once. He'd even put off his own work to hurl insults at me. I've heard a lot about your parents from my folks. They were really dull and useless employees. I bet you inherited their blood, didn't you? That's why you're so incompetent. Born from worthless parents, you poor thing. He would look down on me every day like that. It's one thing to insult me, but bringing my parents into it is just too much. I always wanted to get back at him, but it seems he had the upper hand. Nick, the manager, had apparently informed the headquarters of false work behavior on my part. Because of the false reports he wrote, my work attitude was seen as problematic. As a result, my demotion was decided. Before I could do anything about it, I was assigned to a branch on a remote island. A few days later, around lunchtime, as my transfer was decided, I was packing up my belongings as much as I could. I was taking home some work tools from the store, little by little, and busy with handing over tasks. I've worked here for over 10 years, so leaving was sad, and the reality of parting with colleagues I'd worked with for so long was also painful. But unlike me, Nick, the manager, was in high spirits. Finally, the deadweight is gone. The atmosphere in this store will improve a bit now. He seemed really happy to get rid of me. He used to harass me at least once a day, but recently he hadn't been doing that. So, in a way, I was relieved, but seeing Nick smirking made my heart feel prickly. Even mealtimes feel better thinking you're gonna be gone soon. Even mediocre food tastes better. It's all good news. Colleagues watching this scene sympathized with me. It's a shame that Jacob, who's so well received by the customers, is leaving. Nick's decision is wrong. If only there were someone here who could stand up to him. Yeah, if we had the courage, maybe Jacob wouldn't be getting transferred. I don't hold a grudge against my colleagues who apologize to me sympathetically. I understand their desire not to lose their standing as professionals by defying a superior. If you think about what's right, you should stand up to Nick. However, just because you do the right thing doesn't mean you'll be rewarded. In some cases, the manager might use their position to retaliate. That's the harsh reality, and I had resigned myself to it. If it were Emily, she would have definitely stood up to Nick. She was a strong person, but she got transferred because she opposed him. I wonder where she is now and what she's doing. The colleagues were talking about a certain employee. There was a female employee named Emily who worked at this store until a few years ago. She was in her 30s like me, with a strong and bright personality. If Emily, who always stuck to what she believed was right, had been here, things might have been different. But thinking about such things is meaningless. Even if Emily were here, she would have just been transferred. Reality isn't that kind. She was well-liked and had the respect of many people, working true to herself until a few years ago. However, her actions didn't pay off, and she ended up being transferred. This transfer was also orchestrated by the manager. Because of that incident, we've refrained from opposing Nick and have tried to avoid upsetting him. Thinking about the unchangeable past only darkens my mood. As I was trying to find a different topic, Nick spoke up. Honestly, what was my mom thinking? I told her I hate crabs, seaweed, and oysters. He must have been trying to have lunch somewhere after bringing his packed lunch. It seemed he had retreated to the back room without us noticing and had now returned. Nick, looking displeased, had once gotten his finger pinched by a crab, slipped on seaweed, and fell. On top of that, he once had an upset stomach from oysters. That's why he usually avoided eating such things, but his mother apparently put them in his lunch. If he had such bad memories, why did he join a company that handles seafood? Hey, what are you staring at? I'm not a sideshow. Looking grumpy, he lashed out at the employees around. Every time we saw him, we couldn't help but be puzzled. Hearing about how Nick often relies on his parents and his preferences was quite something. At his age, still being taken care of by his parents, that's just sad. It seems they even drive him around and handle all the housework. While Nick may be good at his job, he seems pretty awful as a person. He was probably spoiled by his parents, which is why he turned out to be such a terrible adult. Speaking of which, the other day, he was bragging about his house on his phone. It showed a really luxurious mansion. He must be really rich to live in a place like that. He's probably lived a life without any inconveniences. However, prioritizing his own feelings and trying to get rid of people he doesn't like or taking out his frustrations on others is something he should really stop. There are many things I want to say, but no matter what we say, it probably won't get through to him. If it could, Emily's advice a few years ago would have made a difference. What are you whispering about over there? Talking behind my back? Even now, Nick yelled at a colleague who was talking near me. I'm terribly worried that they might become the next target of his harassment after I'm gone. That night, I had a dream. I sometimes dream about Nick's harassment, and even in my dreams, he has the upper hand. I'd like to get back at him, even in a dream, but it never goes well. The problem is, when I'm dreaming, I don't realize it's a dream, so I hesitate to act, thinking about the consequences. So, I always wake up feeling bad, but this time was different. If something bothers you, don't just endure it. You have to stand up to it. For some reason, Emily appeared in my dream. Nick, your harassment is unacceptable. Jacob, you need to protest alongside me. She defended me and encouraged me to stand up to him. I shook my head, lacking the courage, but Emily kept repeating the same thing. In hindsight, it might have been foreshadowing what was to come. But at that time, I didn't know, and I woke up feeling puzzled. The next morning, I called Emily, someone I had avoided contacting until now. To my surprise, I discovered something astonishing. It was a stroke of luck amid misfortune. After that, I learned many things from her to get used to my new workplace. A few weeks had passed since my transfer to the remote island was decided. Since my new workplace is far from the city where the head office is, I had to start preparing for the move early. So, I used my free time on my days off to pack my things into boxes. The new place I was transferred to was a small branch on a remote island, and I rented an apartment nearby. To start my new life there, I began planning everything. In the midst of this, my father came to help. He usually runs a coffee shop with my mother in a corner of the city. But today, the coffee shop was closed, so the timing was perfect. By the way, my mother was attending a cooking class today, so she wasn't here. "What? Have you finished already?" My father looked disappointed as he saw the tidy room. A few days ago, he had said in an email that he would help with the move, so I expected him to come. However, I had finished the work before he arrived, so there was nothing left to do. Since he had come all this way, I felt bad sending him back, so we decided to go out for dinner. We went to a place that serves delicious hamburgers about a 10-minute walk away. "So, how have things been lately? Any trouble at work?" I was surprised when I heard about the sudden transfer. Of course, I didn't want to worry my family with the truth, so I evaded. My eyes might have darted a bit, but I hope he didn't notice. Working in the city is a bit tiring, so I thought I'd take it easy in the countryside with lots of nature. I requested the transfer myself. "Really? I was surprised when you suddenly told me over the phone a few days ago. Sorry, things have been hectic here, so I couldn't tell you earlier." I continued to speak lightly, trying to make it seem like it was no big deal. I wasn't sure what my father thought, but he didn't ask any probing questions, so I think I managed to fool him. We talked while eating the hamburgers that had been brought to our table. Then my father said something unexpected. "Actually, I heard that George's son works at your company, so I was a bit worried. His name is Nick. Do you know him?" "Oh yeah, he's the manager." I couldn't lie on the spot, so I answered honestly. Then I hastily added a follow-up. "But he's serious and very competent at his job. There haven't been any issues with him." "That's good to hear." George was a bit narrow-minded and had a strong persecution complex, so I was worried. Though it doesn't necessarily mean his son is the same. Families often have similarities, don't they? I nodded, thinking about how my taste buds are similar to my mother's and how I love seafood. Incidentally, my tendency to avoid conflict is similar to my father's. I've probably been influenced by my father, who tries to resolve conflicts by enduring them himself. I had a lot of experiences with George. My father, who gazed into the distance as he spoke, and my mother, who wasn't here today, worked at the same company as me until a few years ago. They weren't involved in customer service, but worked in the product development department. However, they had a dream of opening their own cafe, so they left the company a while back. "So, what kind of person is this George?" "I've never met him," I asked cautiously, trying not to reveal my unease. "He was a colleague in the same department, but we often fought over your mother. After our wedding, things calmed down, but I wonder what he's doing now." I hadn't known about this. It made sense now why Nick seemed to know about my parents. If he had heard about them from his own parents, that explained a lot. It was good to hear this story from my father today, but it made me wonder if George still held a grudge from back then. Maybe that's why his son, Nick, harassed me after hearing about it from his parents. Of course, it's possible there's another reason, but seeing how Nick is so attached to his parents, it's hard not to think this way. He probably assumed I was a bad person because of what his parents said, just as my father had thought similarly. "I'm glad to hear you're getting along with George's son." "Yeah." I smiled awkwardly, trying to steer the conversation to another topic. Unable to tell my father about the harassment, I talked about other things with mixed feelings. On my last day at the head office, I shared some items I wasn't taking with me as a token of thanks to those who had helped me. Seeing my colleagues sad to see me go made me a bit melancholic. Changing environments is tough, but hang in there. I've heard people get sick when they move to a different climate, so take care. I'll be fine. Actually, I know someone over there. While having these conversations, Nick, looking displeased, approached me. "Humph, I can't understand why anyone would be sad to see such a useless person leave. It's normal to feel relieved when you're gone." "Hey, You're not causing any trouble just because you're leaving, right? He seemed worried that I might report his behavior to the higher ups. If he was so concerned about that, he shouldn't have acted this way in the first place. To be clear, I haven't reported his harassment to anyone. If I were certain I could get Nick removed from this department, I would. But under the current circumstances, there's no benefit to doing so. I didn't want to cause trouble for my colleagues with a half-baked attempt. What are you talking about? Good, as long as you're not. Know your place. He paused for a moment before loudly addressing me again. Useless people like you are better off in a rural branch. With a look of relief, he sneered as he said this. After thinking for a moment, I decided to leave him with a little snide remark. You'll regret this, you know? What? Even though I didn't report him, I couldn't leave without a bit of payback. So, as a token of my gratitude for his support, I decided to send seafood, which he despises, to his home. He had boasted about his luxurious mansion without considering the risk of revealing its location. I sent high-quality, undeniably premium crabs and oysters to be delivered during the day, ensuring he would have a lavish spread for a while. If it were just Nick, he might throw away the seafood he dislikes, but he lives with his parents. So, for the next few days, his table will surely be adorned with foods he hates. A few days later, after such an exchange, I moved to the remote island and worked with fierce determination. All I wanted was to prove Nick wrong. Thanks to that, the branch I worked at quickly surpassed $600 million. We became #1 in sales. The work on the island was demanding, but overall, it was fulfilling. Ironically, my goal of proving Nick wrong became a source of strength for me. Not only that, but I also had an unexpected reunion. Emily, who used to work in the same department as me, was at the island branch. Because Emily taught me about the new workplace and the job details, I was able to adapt quickly and become an immediate asset. It was a good thing I decided to contact her after seeing her in my dream. There are a lot of tourists here. There are many souvenir shops near the store, as well as tourist attractions. Thank you. Your detailed information has been a great help. Without her guidance, I wouldn't have achieved results so quickly. A year after my demotion, thanks to my continuous efforts, I became the top salesperson and was asked to give a seminar to the head office staff. This is where I plan to make Nick pay. At 9 a.m., I arrived at the familiar branch and talked with the staff. The person I'm closest to is still Emily. Seeing her every day now feels normal, but I was surprised when I found out she worked at this branch. When we reunited at the store, we had a conversation like this. It's been a while. Have you aged a bit since I last saw you? Of course not. If anything, you have. It was an exchange that felt like no time had passed. Trading these carefree words made me feel like I was back in the past. I was delighted to reunite with her, thinking I might never see her again. What surprised me was how positively she was working despite being demoted. Weren't you sad about being demoted? Not really. There's no point in looking down. I have to do what I can. To me, the way she lived her life seemed incredibly bright. She wanted to know what had happened at the head office, so I explained everything to her in detail. When Emily learned about Nick, her expression darkened. That's terrible. You must have had a hard time. People can get used to anything, for better or worse. At that time, I was just irritated, but I might not have taken it too seriously. It wasn't until I left the head office that I realized how abnormal Nick's behavior was. Maybe it was right to stand up to him instead of enduring it. Getting used to things is scary. No matter how unreasonable something is, once it becomes part of your daily life, it starts to feel normal. Cheer up. You still have a chance, right? Then, at the upcoming seminar at the head office, you can prove yourself. Emily comforted me, placing a reassuring hand on my shoulder. Over the past year, I worked hard and achieved great results. I brought in over $600 million in sales and became the top salesperson. Of course, luck played a part, with a new tourist facility opening nearby. But this outcome was also a result of my efforts. I could proudly hold my head high. Being called useless all the time might have made me internalize those words and become self-deprecating. But that's all in the past now. And so, I headed to the head office in the city. Using a combination of boats and trains, it took several hours, but eventually, I was greeted by the familiar hustle and bustle of the city. Walking through the crowded streets, so different from the nature-filled island, I made my way to the head office. It was a day when no customers would be around, so only those attending the seminar were present. In the room prepared for the seminar, I got the materials and equipment ready and reunited with my former colleagues. They were happy to see me again. At first, everyone seemed cheerful, but it turned out that my concerns had come true. When I asked about what happened after I left, their expressions darkened. Nick has been harassing us in various ways. We can endure it as punishment for not doing anything. The new employees are the ones I feel sorry for. They're okay now, but the thought that they might face the same treatment someday worries me. Nick was harassing those who couldn't perform well and bad-mouthing anyone who didn't agree with him. I had hoped he would change, but it seems he hasn't. In that case, there's no other choice. I'll make him face the consequences with the plan I've been considering for a while. Just then, Nick, who hadn't shown his face until now, walked in. It looked like he had been napping somewhere, with drool marks around his mouth and bed hair. When he saw me, his face twisted into an expression of disgust. I didn't want to see your face because it's so unpleasant, but the higher Ubis must have told you to be the speaker, right? Fine, let's see what you've got. Not that it'll be anything worthwhile, just a waste of time. As expected, he belittled me, but it would be interesting to see how long that attitude lasted. When the seminar started, I began my presentation. Scanning the faces in the room, I noticed some senior executives standing at the back. I hadn't been told they would be attending, so I was surprised. The invitation had come directly from the higher Ubis, so perhaps that explained it. Despite my curiosity, I proceeded with my task. I began the seminar. I utilized the benefits of the remote island by promoting products that highlighted the richness of nature. Additionally, I focused on attracting tourists by appealing to both our loyal local customers and new demographics. I explained everything that had happened over the past year and the strategies I had used in my sales efforts. After talking for about an hour, I held a Q&A session and organized group simulations for the participants. Nick was visibly irritated, but the others listened attentively, indicating my explanations were effective. The seminar proceeded smoothly without major issues. But it couldn't end without a bang. At the end, I dropped a bombshell. Let me share something from the past. I carefully kept my emotions in check as I said what I had wanted to say most. Looking at the senior executives and the new employees in the room, I practiced the same methods at the head office as I do now. I like to think I achieved decent results. However, it seems none of my efforts were recorded. If the information had been shared, the sales at this branch could have been even higher. I mentioned the sales figures from my time at the head office and observed the reactions of those in the room. My colleagues listened with guilty expressions, while Nick looked increasingly frustrated. The new employees seemed puzzled. The senior executives in the room murmured among themselves upon hearing my story. I had been practicing the same methods even when I was at the head office. While my motivation played a part in achieving visible results on the island, it wasn't the only factor. I found out that my practices and sales results were not reported to the higher Ubis by a certain individual. I looked directly at Nick as I said this. All eyes in the room turned to him. What? Nick, with a look of shock on his face, began to fluster. Nick, caught off guard by the unexpected attack, glared at me with a reddened face. Finally, I turned to my colleagues and the new employees with a serious expression. If anyone here is experiencing something similar, please don't suffer in silence. Enduring it won't change the situation. After you leave, someone else might face the same treatment. My colleagues, seemingly moved, exchanged thoughtful looks with each other. I hoped this would encourage them to take a stand. A woman named Emily, whom I met at the branch, worked positively no matter the circumstances. She didn't look down, but did what she could. Emily still shines brightly today. With those final words, I concluded the seminar. Of course, everyone has their own priorities, so I'm not saying you should stand up. But if you have even a little strength to resist, I think you should. After that, Nick, his face red with anger, tried to confront me, but my colleagues and the executives stopped him. The things he had done would now be thoroughly investigated. Hopefully, he would receive the punishment he deserved. As I felt relieved, my father suddenly appeared. He had apparently been observing the seminar from outside the room. "You explained things very well. You might make a good teacher," he praised me. But he was no longer an employee, so why was he here? "Why are you here, Dad?" "I was worried about you." He said this with a concerned look on his face. It seemed he had known all along about the troubles I'd been facing. "A year ago, when I saw you, you seemed a bit off. So, I asked some of my acquaintances who are still working to look into it." I was surprised by my father's words, spoken with a worried expression. Although I had tried not to show it on my face, it seemed my father had seen through me. It took some time, but I found out what had been happening at the head office. "But since you were transferred, I didn't want to stir things up and cause more trouble for you." Recently, he had heard from old acquaintances that I would be giving the seminar. So, he had appealed to the higher ups to ensure Nick wouldn't cause any trouble. That's why there were so many senior executives attending the seminar. "Thanks, Dad. Thanks for looking out for me." "Of course. You're my precious son." There are families who smother their children with care, and there are those who quietly watch over them and lend a hand when needed. Nick's family wasn't the latter, which probably led to his personality. After that, Nick received a severe warning from the higher ups. This prompted him to lash out at the employees, but my colleagues stood up to him. "We have to put an end to this." "That's right." Jacob stood up, "So we should too." They stood up to Nick and reported his harassment to the higher ups. As a result, Nick was fired. After leaving the company, he became a recluse, relying on his family. Apparently, he found working too troublesome. He considered working again several times, but couldn't because of the rumors circulating in the neighborhood. It might be fine for now, but what will he do when his parents are gone? That's not our concern, but he will likely face hardships in the future. As for me, I'm back at the branch, living my usual life. Having achieved good sales results, I had the option to return to the head office, but I chose to stay at the branch. Unlike when I was first demoted, I've grown attached to this place. "A customer wants to talk to you, Jacob." "You're quite popular." "That's nice to hear, but I'm a bit busy right now." "Could you handle it, Emily?" All right. Just treat me to something after work." The employees at the head office in the city seem to be working happily under their new manager. The man who replaced Nick is kind and considerate of his employees. As for my parents, they continue their unchanged daily lives. They still run their coffee shop in a corner of the city and are well liked by the local customers. Sometimes they email me to ask if I'm having any trouble, but they never interfere deeply in my life. Through this experience, I learned the importance of standing up against unfairness without giving up. There are many problems in the world, but avoiding them or simply enduring them doesn't help. I've realized that facing challenges head-on and striving to improve the situation is essential.